Hello, everyone. This is Sartaj Anand, the founder of EgoMonk, and welcome to Business Beyond 2030, the show where we explore the socio-economic and technological revolutions shaping our world and the role of business in realizing the future. Business has the transformative ability to move all of us from today to tomorrow with a shared purpose. And I have the privilege to unpack complexity with the world's smartest and most compassionate business leaders and decision makers as they deliver on their promise of abundance. In today's episode, we're joined by Sunil Shah, who happens to be the CEO and global head of Societe Generale's Global Solutions Center and European Business Services. In his current role, he oversees centers across India and Romania and leads over 9,000 employees. These centers deliver information technology services, banking operations, finance services, and research activities for the group all over the world. Sunil is a proven thought leader who is committed to accelerating technology-driven changes and realizing Societe Generale's digital transformation journey. So on today's episode, we have Sunil from Societe Generale. Thanks so much, Sunil, for choosing to join us today.
Thank you. It's my pleasure.
By 2030, we're expecting massive workforce transformation since digital natives will occupy senior decision-making roles in organizations.
Yes.
So how are you cultivating this next generation of leaders at Societe Generale?
So we have very specific programs today in place to identify some strong, talented people within that workforce, and then having some interventions for them to develop over the next 5-10 years as the senior leadership within the organization. What we realize is that that young workforce has a lot of energy, the agility, the ability to really multitask. They like a purpose-driven organization, and we value that. However, we want to embed within them the experience that the organization has, the wisdom that it has generated over many years, and the ability to understand customers and make sure that they are aligned towards the customer journey and needs. We put together programs wherein they go through interventions or mentoring type of interactions with senior leaders within the organization. They go through some special projects where they rotate across different roles within the entity, and that enables them to see different parts of the bank, gain multiple types of exposure, build a network within the organization so that they know how to leverage and move things across in a very quick way. We feel that with some of these interventions, we are able to develop some of these young workforce into future leaders. Of course, leveraging their innate strengths of really being, open and having a very flexible way of working and leveraging their new thought process of trying to challenge everything and being, very particular about the way they interact with it. So we want to leverage all of that and build that new workforce.
Great. I think young people appreciate flexibility a great deal. They appreciate this sort of sense of that they are in control of their careers and also the organizations in whatever functions they lead. What sort of flexibility do you offer, or how much? It's such a regulated industry that you operate in.
Absolutely.
So how do you give them this balance of that within this playground that is possible, you're in control?
No, that's a very good question because absolutely right. While we would love to be completely open, completely flexible, free for all, a new age startup, the reality is that we cannot be that, say, open about everything that we do. There are certain things that are very basic and important and critical for a banking environment. For example, there are certain regulatory mandatory trainings that people have to do. There are certain certifications, depending on the roles that they're playing, they have to make sure that they are certified on those things. So those things are non-negotiable. Whether you're generation X, Y, Z, A, B, C, we don't care. Everybody has to comply with those.
Yeah.
But however, having said that, on the rest of the space, be it the type of work atmosphere they have, their willingness to work, let's say, very flexible hours depending on their convenience, their ability to pick and choose projects that they would like to work on, their ability to multitask. On all of those, we are transforming and we have offered them a lot of flexibility. For example, we just rolled out what we call as a flexible work policy. So people can, choose when they want to sort of what type of work duration they want to pick. They don't have to take approval from their manager. So it's not something, that the managers have a right to say yes or no. It's their right. So they do.
It's more opt out than opt in.
Yeah, exactly. So that works quite well. We find a lot of people using that flexibility. The other thing also that we have recently changed is allowing people to work from home. Again, as banking, as you said, was earlier very regulated with very tight...
Clock in, clock out.
Exactly. And very tight, let's say, internet controls, not able to, sort of use
take your work
websites,
home.
take your work home because of the confidentiality of information, access to the application. So all of that are now using some of the new technologies are being, quote unquote, liberated, if I can say. So now we are allowing, with few exceptions, but by and large, a large part of our tech population, people who develop IT systems, code, etc., are able to easily work from home because we now give laptops to everybody within the organization. They can connect to their home Wi-Fi network, connect to our. We have very secure gateways through which they connect to our protocol. So they are now able to work from home. So that is a flexibility that many people value.
Are looking for,
Absolutely. It's actually quite popular. We find that almost 40% of the organization use that flexibility at least once a week. Initially, to make sure that people do come to office and there are some physical, interactions with the team, the manager, we are limiting it to approximately 2 days in a week. But still, that's a lot of flexibility.
That's 40% of your work time.
Absolutely, yes. So they value that, and then the ability to meet different people, to interact with managers. There are many forums. So we recognize that they are very open, very able to challenge, and we provide that atmosphere for them.
I think we've noticed even in mature economies such as the US also, remote working and remote teams is just a global reality now. So I'm just glad to see that we're already experiencing that trend in India already.
Absolutely. It's something that based on our internal surveys, we have found that it's quite popular. However, having said that, we still are working out, let's say, how in this type of a remote working environment do teams interact? How does the manager continue to measure the productivity of the person? How do we make sure that the people are still available in case of urgencies, emergencies? So those are some of those things that we are working out, but the benefit per se is there to stay.
So this segues perfectly into the next question, which is proximity often builds culture. Right. So in this sort of environment as well, how do you approach culture building as your sort of responsibility at Societe Generale? What's the culture like at Societe Generale?
So we want a culture which is based on, to put it very simplistically, innovation and agility. Okay, we want people to value the fact that they have to come up with new ideas, be proactive, find solutions to the challenges that they face by themselves, and look at different things to solve a problem. Okay, different approaches to solve a problem. So that is innovation, and innovation can take many forms. It's about working with startups, sort of brainstorming with your team to come up with new ideas, using some solutions that are applicable in a different part of the work area to another part, because there's a lot of sort of fungibility across that. And agility, because we want people to be quick and be reactive and adapt themselves to the changes that are happening in the ecosystem, and most importantly also fail fast. So we want them to experiment, to try new things, but if we realize quickly that it is not working, maybe some adaptation is required, we want them to do that very quickly. So the days of having a project, a plan, and
the classic waterfall model doesn't work,
or even long projects. So we now prefer much more 1 to 3 month projects rather than the 9 month, 1 year, 1.5 year projects, because we feel that there is much more predictability on those things. The ability to adapt and learn is
much
absolutely
higher,
much higher. So So the culture, as to come back to your original question, so innovation and agility is really the culture that we want. Of course, on the foundation, we really want everybody to have their core values of being customer centric, to make sure that they value teamwork, the collaboration, being responsible for the work that they do, for their overall responsibility as a banking employee to this is very important as well.
Great. This lends well to the next part, which is there's a tremendous competition for talent right now.
No, absolutely.
And you have Uber, you have Alibaba, you have Google, you have Played. Right now, every technology company seems to be becoming a financial company as well.
Yeah.
So in this sort of new hyper competitive environment with these new peers that you have, how do you stay ahead? How do you sort of continue to innovate as a legacy bank?
No, absolutely very pertinent question. And it is true that the new GAFAs, the Uber, the Google, Amazons, etc., are giving the banking sector, let's say, a run for their money. Okay, we have to be very vigilant and let's say very aware of the type of new ecosystems that they are building, and see how we can adapt to that. So yes, so we are working to make sure that we are adapting some of the new practices and the new ideas that are emerging in that world are percolating into the banking industry. So to give a concrete example, platform, okay, an entire platform-based economy, which is what Amazon, Uber, all of them have built, is something that we see as a trend emerging within the banking sector as well, with the concept of open banking, and in the future, in 5-10 years, we feel that the bank is going to really transform as a platform with different services, with the consumers, be it an enterprise or a retail consumer, being able to choose what he wants from different sort of parts of the ecosystem, but having a platform to interact and see all of that. It's something that the new GAFAs have, let's say, pioneered, emerged, etc. And we feel that it is a very good idea to take that within the banking ecosystem, and we see that already happening quite well. So we are investing in those type of transformations. We also have something which we would like to retain, which is basically our knowledge of the consumer, of the connect with our consumer. Even though everything is moving into a digital world, we still feel that some consumer segments, would still prefer some
a higher touch level.
Higher touch point, somebody who can empathize with them, somebody who can relate to their situation. Even though there are technology, there is robot, a lot of things are emerging, but sometimes having a person to talk to who can give you the most let's say pragmatic advice is still valuable. And we feel that the banks that are like literally institutions now, like our bank, more than 150 years old, will still continue to have a very strong edge vis-a-vis, let's say, those GAFAs. So we have to learn from them, no question about that, and we are doing that. But we still feel that we have a very good offer that can work with our consumer.
Yeah, this strength of consumer access, consumer history, consumer knowledge is a big differentiator, because they didn't exist 10 years ago. These companies. We noticed also that you have a successful startup program, Catalyst. How are you sort of approaching open innovation? How do you work with sort of other ecosystem stakeholders to also solve problems? Because not all problems can be internally resolved.
Absolutely. For us, as I mentioned earlier, we want to promote that culture of open innovation, people thinking about the full ecosystem to solve their problems, rather than saying, everything has to be solved in my own silo and in my own team. What we realized very early in the game is that the startups, the fintechs, the regtechs, so the different types of startups that we see initially within the Indian ecosystem, but now globally as well, are very pertinent, in solving some of the problems that we are going to have. Okay, but we needed a proper framework or a particular, let's say, methodology of interacting with them, because working with startups, while of course for the startup it's a challenge, even for large banks for likes, it can be very complicated and very messy, because they are much more agile. They use things that are much more open source, much more cloud based, and we have certain restrictions that we need to make sure that when we integrate with them, that we follow that. One of the other things that we also see working with startups is, while the solution is very innovative and when works beautifully for a certain scale, when the scale goes beyond, their solutions
There
are
is
not designed for a higher scale, which normally a large bank would require. So we need to work with them collaboratively to make sure that their solution is first of all customized to what we want, and then it has the overall foundation that helps that startup to scale up. So we designed this program called Catalyst. So Catalyst is a 10-week, approximately 10-week to 12-week program, wherein during the initial phases, we work internally within our bank to collect all use cases, problems, difficulties, challenges, or maybe some things that people wanted to do, but so far they have not yet done. So we collect all those use cases. We, sort of go through a filtration process to make it, a reasonably manageable list.
Yeah.
And then we publish it to the full startup ecosystem. There are many portals, there are many startup ecosystems that we tap into, like the NASCOM startup, the Numa, many ecosystems. So we tap into that and advertise these, let's say, use cases. And startups are free to look at those use cases and then say, okay, that's probably something that, my product can solve. So then they apply. There is a very simple user interface that we have developed where the startups say, okay, this particular use case, I think my product can help you, solve this problem. I'm interested to participate in this Catalyst program, etc. Yeah. So then we look at the application. After a window of around 3 weeks, we look at all the applications that we have. And then we go through another filtration process where we actually call the startups for a quick discussion with our business leaders. And then, sort of evaluate the robustness of the solution, evaluate the probability of, while we are we don't really know the future, we try our best to see which of those startups have a very, let's say, good chance or, addressing the problem.
Validation on your
end. Some validation
as well.
on our end to make sure it's not just a startup that came up last week and, they want to. So once we do that, we invite the startups into our company. So we have created a separate area, which is completely open, not connected to our digital sort of, internet ecosystem, but so they're free to do what they have. And we provide them access of our experts, people who know the business problem. So the startup and the bank together work on customizing their solution to meet the needs of our bank. And then we have architects who help them, look at the overall scale, etc. And after 10 weeks, so they have in between there are a couple of touch points. They have a MVP, a minimal viable product that we can see. And if the business likes that, then we move into the stage of productionizing them and getting. We find that with this program, quite structured, because we have resolved all the standard issues, the legal contract, the IP related, the infrastructure related discussions, the pricing, all of that are all streamlined. So the conversations and the whole
they much move
quicker, and we are able to get quickly to the startup working on their thing very, very easily.
So as a technologist, this always interests me that startups tend to move very quickly and hence they adopt what I call a technology debt. Yeah. They'll make this upfront shortcut or hack to build the MVP out, but then they're stuck with that legacy decision.
Yeah.
And then the other, particularly in the fintech space, there is data is oil, right?
Yeah.
They need a lot of data to probably validate their model or train their models on AI. So do you provide any of that support to help them?
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll take the second part of your question first. So data is required for the startups to succeed. Otherwise, they will not be able to fine tune their solution to meet our needs. However, on our side, we also have the constraint of not being able to, not exposing confidential client data directly to them. So we go through what is called as a masking procedure. Take all the data that is required. We sanitize it, remove very sensitive part, and then provide them that access to the data. And that works well. And once they finish their MVP and then they move into where we think that it is a good product that can move into our IS ecosystem, at that time, of course, they are hosted in our data center and they have access to live data. So there is no issue of that. So it's really works well. So, but we do have to make that effort of taking our data and scrubbing it and cleaning it and then giving it to them. Without that, I don't think having an engagement program with a startup makes sense at all. To the first part of your question, that they do hacks and they take shortcuts. No, in our experience, what we have found is that rather than hacks, what they do is they go for very open solutions. Like everything is open stack. Based on open source, cloud technologies, etc. So their ability to do things, quickly is far higher than an enterprise. But what we have found that is it's probably an area where banks like us have to probably also change. We should be more ready to adapt those open platforms, and we are trying to do that. We are trying to make sure that all open source stacks are in our list of validated technologies that we do. Afterwards, the help that they require to scale their solution, if the foundation is done well, and which our architects can help them with that, then the question of scaling is totally depends on how much power you put in, how much hardware, etc. So I wouldn't call it as a shortcut, but it's much more that they use a very open ecosystem to build their products.
Okay. You've already mentioned this previously, that there is the rise of digital banks and you have robo-advisors such as N26, Betterment, and they've sort of transformed the traditional client experience. So it's much more smarter banking sort of has emerged. What do you think of this trend of robo-advisors and completely digital banks?
So we see the emergence of a lot of these only digital banks. I think at least in Europe, some of them are called as neo banks.
Yes.
The new banks. Yes, so that trend is here to stay, and we feel that there is a particular segment of the population that are suited or that will be attracted towards those type of banks. Okay, so typically let's say young adults, or just people who are into the workforce, whose banking needs at the moment are very minimal, and they just need a banking for very
quick
basic
access,
transactions, access, payments, etc. would be very attracted to those payments. However, as the needs of a consumer becomes a little bit more complicated and a little bit more, they're into a relationship, or they're in, trying to buy a house, get a loan, or have some, children living, in different parts of the world, and we need some international. So when those things happen, we realize that probably a little bit of a more full service bank is probably much more the opt solution. So I guess the answer lies in the fact that a good institution should probably offer different channels for the different types of.
So it's a product segment rather than a competitor.
That's how at least I see it for the moment. For Societe Generale, for example, we do have a fully online internet bank called Boursorama. So it's a completely digital bank where you can register online. The KYC is online.
Yeah.
You don't have to ever visit
a branch
or see anything. Everything is done. And we also, of course, have a very solid bank, which is much more retail, large presence. We have wealth advisors. So we have the full spectrum. Yeah. And different times of your life cycle, you will use different things.
It's kind of like the new stack for banking. You need everything for everyone.
Yeah.
When you think of banking from a technology perspective, what trends do you think are on the horizon next few years in the run up to 2030?
Yes, 10 years is a long time.
Yeah.
It's a really long time, especially in a technology in the space and in banking as well. But you already see a lot of things that are based on AI, ML, data, very strong user experience type of products like chatbots, advisors. All of them are already mainstream. I mean, today any banking you go, you find those tools readily available. So those things are, I would say, are already there, and will continue to exist. But some of the new things that I feel could come in the future, one, I already spoke a little bit about the platform. The emergence of platforms, I think, is something that will come today. You're heavily tied towards a bank. If I am a customer of a bank A, I go to the bank A's internet website or the mobile app. I have to do everything on that thing. If I have to buy some financial products like mutual funds, stocks, then I go to another institution. I do something like that. If I have to make some small payments, then I go to another type of. So it's different players are there in different. But I feel for like 5, 7, 10 years down the line, clearly the platforms will emerge where you can do this seamlessly with different institutions of your choice, but for you the interface will be very same, very simple, and
So
and
one
in the
wrapper.
one wrapper platform
Yeah.
where you can integrate everything into that would probably emerge, is my view, and we are working towards that, and we see that happening. So this is clearly both applicable on the B2C segment, the retail segment, and even much more on the B2B segment, even probably more relevant there, because banks, when you're dealing with other institutions, they are also quite savvy, so they know which product of which
Yeah.
type they want, and they would really want a mix and match rather than be tied up to one particular entity. So we really see that as an emerging trend across. Apart from that, we also see trends related to everything being moving away from the back office type of a concept, which will probably slowly diminish, especially when you're dealing with B2B, other enterprises. Today, when you interact or buy and sell something or have some financial interaction, there is always something, in the back office that needs to be, either something has to be reconciled, some payments, some closing. All of those, I feel, with technology, with AML, will probably be completely handled by technology and would slowly.
So full automation might occur there.
Full automation in the true spirit will occur there, and we feel some of those things will completely diminish. The focus on user experience, what we call as journey, a consumer journey, be it as a retail bank customer or as a enterprise customer. I think the entire banking industry will orient themselves on these journeys. What does a retail consumer, let's say, who has newly started working, what are his needs, how does his experience look like, and everything banking services will be adapted to that journey. The same for an enterprise. So we feel that rather than the classical way of looking at a bank saying, I have this segment, that segment, this product, that product, and the customer deciding what he wants, it will be much more based on his journey. Is the level.
So sort of like responsive products.
Yeah, exactly. Responsive products that are much more personalized and relevant to the experience that the consumer is having in the real world.
Okay. This sort of lends really well to this question around fourth industrial revolution technologies. Now, AI, ML, IoT. We've already sort of seen these being used to create more frictionless commerce.
Yeah.
How has this ramp up affected your internal innovation roadmap? Because these technologies have matured very, very quickly. They took a long time.
Yeah.
And then suddenly they were ready.
Yes.
So how has that affected your sort of internal roadmap to incorporate these technologies?
You are right to mention that these technologies were there for a long time, and suddenly they are entering this phase, as we call as a rapid adoption. They're being now adapted rapidly everywhere. So the first impact is really on our internal capability, workforce, so their ability to have that skill set and that competency. Fortunately, I think many banks, including us, we probably saw it coming. So we have been building capability on that for the last, let's say, 4 or 5 years on that skill set. So we do have now internally staff who are competent to work on those type of technologies, but still the speed of adoption of those is still massive, and we'll always have a shortage of people who are like good data scientists, data modelers, people who can really look at what we have within the bank and see how it can be adapted to meet the new needs of this. So that's one implication of the emergence and the speed of adoption of these new technologies. The second really is our own awareness about the data that we have and how we are able to put it together. As we spoke earlier, the bank has massive amounts of data about past history of all the transactions, the customers, etc. But they are all in different silos, etc. So we need, and we have been working on that. We need a strategy to put it all together in a data sort of a lake type of an environment that is suitable for some of these new technologies to work. So that is another implication. So we have to work to transform our data. And data, when you have such large volumes of data and you have very, let's say, technologies that are dependent on the quality of the data, the ability to be sure of your data quality becomes very important. So we need programs to make sure that the data quality of what we are, putting in the data lake is also up to the expectations and things like that. The other interesting challenge, which probably a banking industry is facing much more than other players, or how to work with regulators vis-a-vis these new technologies. Okay, in the past, the regulators were very, let's say, saying, okay, do you have a process for this? Do you have a process for that? Do you have an exception for this? Do you have a report for that? Now, with some of these new technologies, it's very adaptive and it learns based on the past history of the data. And it's an interesting dialogue with the regulators to show that the technology is adapting itself to the exceptions and all of that. So it's a journey with the regulators and the banks, to both understand the power and the limitations of those technologies to make sure that they're comfortable with those roles.
You mentioned the regulator, and regulators are super powerful in terms of dictating the rules and making sure there's a fairness in the ecosystem.
Yes.
Have you seen the emergence of sandboxing, sort of regulatory sandboxes where you can play with this sort of technology stack happen in India?
No, I mean, the regulators are, we see the regulators as a very important part of the ecosystem, right? They make sure that there is a good level playing field, that we do things that are not harmful for the consumer and the economy. But in terms of regulatory sandbox, yes, with some regulators, they do have an area that they provide us where we can test out things.
Yes.
And when they have some new expectations, we can probably send them, test files, etc. But we are not yet seeing a regulatory sandbox where we can play with some of these new technologies and then, interact with them to, convince them that this is working or not. Right now, the sandboxes are much more limited to reporting, regulatory reporting, where we have to send them certain mandatory data and things like that. Yeah.
So recently we saw that the Institute for Development and Research in Banking Technology, which is an arm of the Reserve Bank of India, they've been working on developing a model blockchain platform for banking. How do you approach sort of newer emerging technologies like blockchain? How do you incorporate them? What's your thinking on that?
Yeah. No, so blockchain, which behind that is the distributed ledger technology, right? DLT, as we call it. It's really an emerging technology, or many people would probably say it is already, mainstream. For us, what we see today as a very key value of a DLT is the ability to build a consortium, build a network of different banks who can, be in that work or consortium, and having that technology help us trust each other and enable to work with each other seamlessly. Okay. We are part of a few consortiums and we are already working on pilots and testing a few things with them. For example, trade finance, it's really an area of the banking segment which is very document heavy. It depends on, thick set of documents moving from one bank to the other when you are, doing some international trade financing, etc. That is a very, let's say, good use case for something like a blockchain to be very powerful, because then, once you have a consortium of banks in that field, you can actually don't have to physically move all of those packets of documents, but instead you can create a node and sort of get it approved through that. So there are certain concrete use cases, for example, based on, some of these commodity financing, when oil tankers are moving across the seas, you literally have blockchain nodes that certify that, when the tanker has moved from point A to point B without, you really looking at documents to verify that it has come, etc. So some of those things will simplify banking. But today we are yet to see an impact of that DLT as a technology on direct, let's say, retail banking per se. But certain aspects of the banking activities where you interact with other financial institutions, I think that could be significantly impacted.
It could be the earlier use case.
Yeah, exactly.
So the banking industry is typically very connected and concentrated. That means it is also susceptible to shocks. And we saw this in the recession. We saw this in whenever there's a financial stress point. How do you think about building organizational resilience or anti-fragility at Societe Generale? Besides risk and compliance processes that exist, from a technology lens, how do you view, being resilient to, say, attacks, etc.?
So, yeah, multiple aspects to this question. So, one is as a business, how are we resilient? So, that's really a business strategy question. I think, as a bank, we focus on building very diverse portfolio of businesses. So we have, what we call as really a universal banking offer, retail, investment banking, international banking, wealth management, very, very diverse set of business products and business segments that have, let's say, counter cyclical sort of projections. They are not necessarily correlated with each other, so that gives us a certain amount of resiliency from a business point of view. When one industry is not doing well, the other could support the overall setup. Then coming to from a technology point of view, so two things. One is we really have to be in this new world, as you mentioned, everything being connected. We really have to be open to interact with another part of the ecosystem very quickly. Challenge there is to have your entire information systems designed in a very modular way and exposing the right APIs, as we call it, the APIs to work and connect with other ecosystems. So transforming your internal IS so that it has a clear strategy in terms of exposing the right APIs so that you can plug and play to the different ecosystems is key. And during, as you say, some shocks, etc., it could be very, very pertinent because, you may be working with a particular institution. Tomorrow that can change. So you should be able to quickly adapt and your IS to start interacting with the different players and different regulators. Then finally, the last point of your question, the angle I can think of is really on cyber security and that. So cyber is a very, let's say, probably one of the biggest risks that every financial institution is facing, and we are no exception. Because of the nature of the institution that we run, we are probably a very targeted institution, be it for hackers or nation states or people who really want to destabilize things. So we have a lot of focus on those, right at different levels of the information system, at the network level, IP level. So various very, very sophisticated technologies are put in place to make sure that we are able to thwart some of these attacks coming from all over the world. But at the foundation, at the real core is that every employee of the bank needs to be aware of some of these threats, because most of the times the vulnerability that hackers and other people who want to cause harm find is through what we call a social engineering. They try to imitate somebody and they get very sensitive and critical information through fraud and then hack into your system.
A gateway.
So we really need all our employees to be super sensitive and aware of these threats, and that's where we have launched massive programs to make people aware. We do mock tests, we do campaigns to really make them aware of this threat. And I think aware employee is probably our biggest shield against some of these threats that we are facing.
So as you think strategically for the next few years, what do you think are the biggest opportunities and challenges that you're working on?
The opportunities are really endless because, as the economy is growing, as consumers are sort of needs, I think the opportunity for a bank which can reimagine itself, to meet the needs of its consumers, be it a retail or an enterprise, and be very fast and agile in adapting to the new trends is probably, can have a big market capture type of a market leader. So that is something that would be very, very possible, and we really are working towards that. Some of the threats, we spoke a little bit about. We need to be very resilient towards cyber, towards market shocks, towards making sure that we are complying with all the regulations and we are not violating. We need to make sure that our employees have this culture of having the right value system so that they do not take decisions or do things that can destroy value and cause harm to the society and to our consumers. So those threats are always there, but I think the opportunities are very let's say, new and emerging in this new world. We have a lot to learn from the new ecosystem of the GAFAs and the internet, and that with the power of the brand and the institution of a bank can create some new powerful products that we can imagine.
Great. So just to circle back, what sort of culture are you trying to build at Societe Generale?
So on the culture part, I would say, to put it very simplistically, we are focusing on a culture of innovation and agility. Okay. To us, innovation is very key in every aspect of what we do. Whether you are a developer or whether you are an analyst or whether you are a customer-facing bank executive, whatever role that you are playing, I think the ability to look at environment around you, the activities that you are doing, and trying to identify proactively new solutions and new ideas that can make the customer experience better, that can make things more efficient, is probably very important for the success of our bank. And we promote that. And innovation can take many forms. It can take technology person probably building a new feature that can be very interesting for a consumer, or somebody who is processing things manually coming up with an idea to automate, or working with a new startup, or coming with a brand new idea to create a new product. So many facets of innovation, and we value that. And we also know that the new emerging workforce, the new consumers value that significantly. So we're really trying to build a culture of innovation and agility. So by agility, what I mean is the ability to test things very quickly and then react to the results of that, and if something is not working the way we think it should have been working, to adapt very quickly, to fail fast, to adjust based on our learnings of that is probably very key. I think we are moving away from very long cycle projects into much more shorter, agile way of working. And we feel that culture of being agile and being able to do things, very quickly with small pieces of it, along with the innovation mindset, will probably be a very key enabler for driving value within the bank.
And how do you sort of integrate diversity and inclusion into that lens?
Yeah, DNI is again a very important topic within the bank. We look at diversity and inclusion across multiple axes. One is pure citizenship initiatives, as we call it, which is how do we make sure that we are playing an important role within the society that we are being we are living in be it in France or in India. So, for example, we are working with women empowerment, making sure that we give training for women livelihood. We are working on projects related to energy consumption, to reduce energy consumption, make it much more green IT, to improve our carbon footprint. So we are working on many citizenship initiative projects. But apart from that, we are also building a very diverse and inclusive workplace. So we are making, for example, our entire workplace much more friendly towards people with different types of disabilities. So we are ensuring that our environment is open to people of all genders, of all types of sexual orientation, of all nationalities, etc. So we have many programs towards that. And finally, in India specifically, the focus is also to have women leaders at the management level. So we are focusing on programs to develop women leaders and make sure that they have the right access and the right opportunity to develop themselves as strong leaders within the bank. So these are some of the DNI initiatives we are running.
So, Sunil, for folks who don't know you, what's that one takeaway? What should people remember you for?
I would say that for me, the way I think about situations is through a framework of abstractness based on a certain decision-making cycle. So I imagine a generalization of the problem and look at the different forces that are acting on it. And then I try to apply that to the situation that I am facing. So that's probably the way I go about my thinking process and my decision-making setup.
So, Sunil, if there's one takeaway that you want people to carry about Societe Generale, what would be that message?
I would say that the focus that we have on open innovation and trying to integrate the full ecosystem within the bank to offer best-in-class services to our customers, that's something that we pioneer and we stand for. And also the movement to a platform-based economy that we are also strongly invested in. I would say those two things are probably the most important ones, transformations that we are going through right now.
Great. Well, thanks so much, Sunil, for being on the show today.
Thank you,
Appreciate your time.
Sartaj, for calling me here.
EgoMonk is an impact publisher, bringing organizations closer to the communities they want to serve and the leaders they wish to influence. We combine insight, context, and experience to deliver asymmetric outcomes and are driven by our goal to positively impact 1 billion human lives by 2030. If you'd like to collaborate with us, then please visit our website, egomonk.com, or send me an email at sartaj@egomonk.com. And if you like this episode, then please do share it with others and consider rating and reviewing us wherever you listen to your podcasts.